a pleasure to have a special seminar today featuring an industrial career panel with several of our distinguished alumni from the Department of Biomedical and Chemical Engineering. So we have with us today Angela Au, Craig Meyerson, and Art Anderson to participate in today's panel discussion. So for those in the audience, just to give you kind of a brief overview of what we have planned for today. We're basically going to go through a short introduction, give all of the panelists a chance to introduce themselves and give you a little bit more information about their background. And then we have some question and answers to go over, some questions that were submitted by the students. And then we'll have some time towards the end of the discussion to open up the floor for some live Q&A. So if you have questions and things that pop up as we're going through the panel, please feel free to put those in the chat. And then there'll be time later for you to go ahead and either raise your hand and ask a question, or we can ask it for you. I'd also like to invite those of you in the audience that are attending, if you're able to, if you don't mind, if your environment permits, to share your video during the panel discussion. I think it'd be great for our panelists to get to see everybody's faces since they can't be here in person. So without further ado, I'll just go ahead and begin by introducing Art Anderson. So he's currently the managing principal for A.H. Anderson Consulting, LLC, and he has more than 30 years of experience in the chemical business and also in consulting. He spent most of that was spent at Air Products, where he held leadership roles in sales, marketing, product management, and regional P&L management. He's also held leadership roles in customer engagement, global business services, and co-led one of its global businesses through its ERP, SAP journey. So he's had a really kind of a complete overview of how the entire chemical industry operates there. So he's provided a number of strategic advisory and hands-on support services to various companies looking to improve their competitive positions, lower costs, optimize productivity, and so forth. So he's holds a bachelor's in science and chemical engineering from Syracuse University. He also did a master's in chemical engineering at Howard University, and then an MBA from the University of Seattle. So Mary Beth, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, so we're going to go in alphabetical order. So Angela Au, she's currently the senior manager for the manufacturing technology group at Bristol Myers. And her team focuses on biologics, drug substance manufacturing. She did her undergraduate degree at Johns Hopkins and then came here to SU to get an MS and PhD degrees in bioengineering, and started her career at Bristol Myers Squibb in 2011 and has been there since then. She's been involved in a lot of authoring of peer-reviewed scientific articles. She's also been an invited presenter at lots of conferences. And one kind of unique concept or additional fact that I think might spur on some questions is that she's really active in community engagement activities. So she, just as an example, she participates as an advisory board member for several local Syracuse school districts and programs. So if any of you have questions about how to kind of incorporate outreach efforts into an industrial career, she might be a good resource for that. And then Craig Meyerson is our third panelist, and he got his BS and MS degrees here at SU in bioengineering. He has over 20 years of experience in the medical device industry. He's held lots of roles throughout his career. He's driven the development of patient monitoring medical devices from the product concept through launch. And more recently, he's focused more on the front-end innovation and advanced technologies. Kind of a unique thing about Craig that might spur on some questions is that he has 22 issued US patents. And he's, so if you have questions about kind of patenting and innovation parts of an industrial career, he would be a good resource for that. He's currently a senior program manager at Welch Allyn, where his team focuses on developing digital health applications. So now I think we'll just give each panelist about 5 minutes to give a little bit more background and introduce themselves a little bit more if they have anything they wanted to add to what Victor and I just said before we get started into questions. Art, do you want to start? We'll just stay in alphabetical order.
Okay. All right. Good morning, everyone. Again, Art Anderson. And I guess I'm probably the veteran on the panel here today. I graduated in '83 from SU with a bachelor's. And one thing interesting, when I came to SU, there was actually no carrier dome, and it was actually being constructed my freshman year. But I did get to enjoy it a couple years after that, for sure. I guess when I look at my career at SU, it was challenging, but I enjoyed it. I mean, I think part of it was self-inflicted by myself to some degree. I played soccer the first 2 years while I was here, and that put a little bit of a pinch on my chemical engineering studies. And after 2 years, I made the decision to stop doing that. And that was probably one of the best decisions of my life, I think. But finished off chemical engineering. I met some great people there. We had a study group there called the Three Amigos, and we are still very close after 30 plus years. And we all went to grad school, masters at different schools, and ended up in the industry and know each other's families. So the time we spent there definitely is memorable, and it's good to still have some good friends that went to SU there. So yeah, I came out, and when I joined a company called Air Products and Chemicals, spent about 30 years there, and a little bit unusual, but I think it was due to just opportunities. And I joined first in the applied R&D innovation space, which probably similar to maybe some of what Craig's doing right now. That was my first few roles there, and I really enjoyed it. And I got an opportunity to shift into commercial, and started to go down the path of marketing, product management, business management for a variety of products, a variety of end markets. And I got to relocate 4 times the family. Sometimes it was positively received, sometimes not so positively received. And so I was able to live and work in places around the world. So I feel pretty blessed from that standpoint. And after about half my career in commercial, I moved to corporate. And corporate was really more about leading global organizations. Actually, Victor shared some of the areas in terms of customer engagement, e-business, global business services, which were great as well, but different. Less customer facing and more internal and process focused. And but that was a good experience. And I'd say I was able to retire after 30 years. I know not everybody gets to do that. And after taking some time off, I went down the path of starting my own consulting firm. So I've been doing my consulting practice as a strategic advisory practice, still focused on the specialty chemicals industry. So all my clients are in the industry. They're largely people that I know. And, it's been actually very good. And, I just focus on just helping executives and companies just be more efficient and productive and competitive. And there's a lot of challenges in the specialty chemicals space. I'm sure it will come up on the call here today. So that creates opportunities for myself. Just one interesting fact before I close is that both my parents are both immigrants, and so they both came from Jamaica. So I'm 100% Jamaican, and so my dad came here for college, probably some of the grad students there at SU. And one of the things that he instilled in me was really a philosophy that things are not as bad as it seems at times. And so I think that's where the term "no problem on" comes into the Jamaican vocabulary. So I lost a little bit of the accent, but clearly that philosophy is still with me. So I'll turn it over to the next one.
Thank you, Art. So I am Angela Au. So I actually did my master's and PhD with Dr. Hasenwinkel. So I actually met her when I was actually at a conference as an undergraduate. So I did my undergrad at Johns Hopkins in biomedical engineering. with a focus on material science. So I really love the idea of regenerative medicine. And back in the day, it was like kind of the hot novel thing, especially soft materials and polymers. So that was something that really infatuated me. So when I went to the Society for Biomaterials conference, I think this is like 2002, 2003, I was trying to decide on which grad school to go to. I actually met Julie and T.W. Caron, who Craig also knows from his program back in the day. And they just entice me. They're just like super outgoing, super normal. I'm like, oh, these aren't like the super nerdy folks that I traditionally think about from engineering. And having gone to Hopkins, I had like a totally different dynamic and things in mind of what I wanted to do, how my career path would go. And once I joined, Dr. Hasenwinkel's lab, it was just like a new community. It was like family. Dr. Hasenwinkel and TW kind of took me under their wing. We did some really cool stuff with biopolymers, looking at back in the day, our neural regeneration, all these cool things, nanospheres, and it was fascinating. But things kind of changed and transitioned, and I had always thought that I was going to go into industry, but I just didn't know what. My focus had always been regenerative medicine. I had my eye on that, and situations came up. So I ended up, after 2 years working in Julie's lab, went into industry at a nutraceutical company. So it's a nutritional supplements. And I'm like, how is I going to be able to translate anything that I'm doing there? And at this nutraceutical company, what I was in charge of doing was building these 3D models of looking at in vitro studies, looking and evaluating at the cellular, mechanism of action in these models. So looking at liver, looking at cartilage, looking at bone, working across industry with veterinary schools, as well as with human physicians and stuff like that, and orthopedists, and looking at whether or not their products would actually attenuate that inflammatory response or oxidative stress response. So that was one way of kind of applying our skills that we had learned, pulling everything together, and that love of math and science, and being able to bridge all these different areas of industry. So I was actually there for 6 years, went back to Baltimore. And at that time, actually the chair of the department here was friends with my boss at the time, who had transitioned also from academia to industry. So that's who I actually worked with. And it was really neat because we ended up networking between Dr. Hasenwinkel, Dr. Gilbert, and Dr. Frondoza, who I was working for, and got me back into a PhD program here at Syracuse. So I kind of had a very abnormal path in terms of my career, where SU really enabled me to take this other direction of continuing my studies, advancing my knowledge, while also doing research at my company to build like a hepatocyte liver model. So that was something that the company actually needed at the time to test their products, but it was also a bioengineering project. So I would travel every so often up to SU, provide some updates to my committee. Email was just starting to take off a little bit more, so we weren't really having virtual conferences, but it was nice because I could see some familiar faces, visit with old friends, and meet with folks that I was really comfortable with. And over that 6-year duration, I was able to get that PhD. I was taking classes at Hopkins, and then, working on the dissertation project. It was tough. I didn't really have a life over those last 4 years. But you find ways to manage it. If there's like a goal, how do you get there? So I did finish my degree, and I was like, well, now what? What am I going to do? So I ended up getting reached out to from a couple of friends from grad school who worked at Bristol Myers. And they're like, well, would you want to join our team to basically develop biologics? And I'm like, oh, I have no idea what that is. I don't know how I could translate those skills. But when I thought about it, instead of growing cells in a solid matrix, how do I grow cells in a liquid environment? So you apply, again, those same basic principles, whether it's fluid dynamics, mass transfer, thermo, those biological mechanisms. same thing, but now you're growing cells in this bioreactor, these transform cells, how do you keep them alive? So all those same things still translate into what we could do, but in these bioreactors. So I did interview, I kind of took that leap of faith, interviewed, got that experience, somehow got the position. And I have been at Bristol for the last 10 years. So I did start in the research process development group, and more on the upstream side. So more of the cell culture, which I was very more familiar with. And I remember my first day on the job, they're like, here are these 6 clones, figure out how to grow them so that we can bring them to first in human studies within 6 months. I'm like, all right, is there a platform? No. So you're using everything that you've picked up through your learnings, through your career, and it's taking that confidence of, hey, maybe I do know what I'm doing and maybe not, and being vulnerable, being able to reach out to your peers, and was able to develop, one of these processes that have now 10 years later is near market, near commercialization. So I spent 2 years in process development, ended up transitioning to the manufacturing sciences and technology space. So again, still more of a lab environment, but doing more of the commercial molecules. So going from early stage to commercial, and then supporting manufacturing in that realm. I took a little bit of a career turn and also tried to bridge the analytical piece. So I spent some time in the quality control area to kind of bridge my knowledge and gaps that I knew were inherent. And then currently I work in the manufacturing technology group. So doing and supporting a lot of investigations and helping troubleshoot and providing more robustness for the processes for molecules and medicines that we have currently on the market. So leading the team there has kind of transitioned over time, but it's a great way to continue being engaged. So kind of to what Art had said, being able to kind of be mobile through your career and see these different aspects of things, and maybe reach out to areas that you might not be as comfortable in. But there is like a lot of opportunity for growth, but it's something that you kind of have to seek as an individual. So I'll pass that on to Craig.
Sure, thank you. So I graduated SU with undergrad in bioinstrumentation. So it's more focused kind of electrical in 98. And then I stayed on for my master's in bioengineering and graduated in 2000. And kind of what was unique for me, actually, one of the things that kept me in the area was at the time, I wound up with a graduate internship at Welch Allyn. And I knew nothing about this company before that. I was like, all right, a small company out in the middle of nowhere. But then as I kind of started digging in, I was like, wow, this actually companies all over the place and all over the world, and really interesting products. So at the time, I just wasn't sure what I wanted to do. Coming out of undergrad, I was like, all right, do I want to go in, always thought maybe medical school might be one path. Do I go into industry, or do I go into research, right? So I really wasn't sure what to do. One of the things I really made sure was in undergrad, I wound up working in a research lab. So at the time we were affiliated with the neuroscience department, and there was a lot of programs out on labs out on South Campus. So I made sure to get into a lab in undergrad to really understand kind of what the life of a researcher would be. And then this opportunity came up for graduate school at Welch Allyn. So it was, instead of doing like a year and a half, I think the degree was at the time, I would do it over 2 years, but work for half my time in industry to get a feel for what that was. So I was like kind of just balancing those 3 pieces, trying to just make sure I got at least some exposure. And then my time at Welch Allyn, my initial project was really focused, and this is like late 90s, early 2000, were like electronic medical records in the primary care space. So it was like kind of a hybrid. Digital cameras were really just starting out. We were on this advanced team. It was the first like 1 megapixel camera, and it cost about $1,000 for the camera. It was crazy, right? So, but the concept was really cool. We were a small innovation team that I was part of over my 2 years, and it was really just fun and exciting. I got to meet a ton of doctors and and do immersion in doctors' offices, and it just realized like, okay, industry is really where I like to be for my personality, for the the type of work. So it was just helpful getting kind of those experiences to help kind of drive where I wanted to go. So yeah, and I've been kind of in the same company for my entire career. So it is also very bizarre. You know, you hear everybody jumps around different companies, but I've been there since, you know, my entire career is over 20 years. I went in after that, my graduate program finished up, I wound up coming on full time. And the interesting part was I learned very early in my career as well, those first 2 years of that project, we were 6 weeks away from launching, and the company decided that they were scrapping the program, right? So they basically threw away everything. And well, in my mind, right? But what happened is we actually learned a ton, and that became like some of the ground for a lot of the connectivity strategy as we started moving through the years. And that's kind of one of the areas that helped me kind of had a thread throughout my career, was about like devices. So I went into, you know, initially into this ear, nose, and throat group. So I was learning about a whole bunch of different products, like more of the traditional. If you think of Welch-Allyn, if you guys have ever seen the products, otoscopes, ophthalmoscopes, go in the doctor's office, the strip on the wall, that's the Welch-Allyn product line. So I went from like, you know, all of this like really technical electrical stuff into like mechanical parts, valves, injection molded things in parts, and I've never done anything with that. So kind of the same, what Angela was saying is, all right, I'm supposed to be working and helping develop something that I have absolutely no experience in. And, but it was all the similar kind of tools that you learn, problem solving, trying to understand, you know, what needs to happen. And I learned a ton, and it really helped me get to like understand some of these cross disciplines better. And I think that's really a lot of where the bioengineering background helps, is we're never so focused in one discipline. You're always thinking kind of wider, broader. And that really kind of has translated extremely well into industry for me. But I was only in that ear, nose, and throat group for about a year and a half or 2 years. And I really wanted to get back to kind of where my undergraduate work was. So in that bioinstrumentation, that's all about like recording, sensing off the body, processing those signals. So I wound up joining we had a technology development team that focused on like blood pressure and thermometry. So doing non-invasive blood pressure, you all have had it done on you, right? You slap the cuff on your wrist, they hit the button. There is a ton of technology that goes into it. Just think about all the variables, motion, different arm size, different physiology, different conditions, right? So that was like a really cool job, because we had to take all of those factors and get those incorporated into building these algorithms. We'd have thousands of patients that we needed to collect data on. So my role was really helping the algorithm team get that data. I'd go and work with the clinical team to go on sites. We would sign up different hospitals to do data collections. We worked with like the local first responders, where we were riding around in ambulances, doing donuts in parking lots, getting motion data, and flying in helicopters and getting helicopter data. So it's really cool. And those algorithms turned out to be the foundation of like all of the standardized blood pressure and thermometry algorithms that we're currently using today in all of like the Welch-Allyn monitors. So it's pretty cool. So I went from like the technology, and then we said, all right, now that needs to be integrated. So then I wound up on the team that is building the monitors to integrate. So I kind of had this hybrid role of testing. So from the bioengineering background, this holistic piece, right? There's electronics, there's software, there's mechanical. With my background, I was able to kind of have that holistic view, where a lot of the development engineers are very tunnel vision on what their discipline. I was able to kind of bring it up a level. And that really kind of got me into this system and test perspective, which is also another kind of common thread that I've had throughout my career. But building the device was really exciting. So I wound up working on, doing tests, and then also project management on some of the monitors. So if you look at the Welch-Allyn portfolio monitors, they're out there. I've been on pretty much all of those that have been that are in the current pipeline, or that are on the current portfolio. But went from the monitors, then also now everything's connecting. So this kind of goes back to where I had originally started, was how does all this stuff play? And started working more system-wise of, all right, there's data being generated in the devices. Now we're going to be connecting to systems. EMRs started really coming on that were really popular. So how does this all kind of work together? So did a kind of a stint with doing a lot of that, making sure like system end-to-end is working, getting out in the field a lot with the development team and the business people. Marketing people have a very different perspective than an engineering person. So we'd literally go out and do an immersion into a hospital for a day. We'd come out at the end of the day and we saw two completely different things. And so I always fought early on, like I wanted to be out in the field. And as I would come back and work with the team, and they'd see, all right, this is actually helpful. It was really cool to like then be able to encourage that to be becoming part of the norm versus an exception. So it's just been a really interesting journey as far as working on that. And then in the end, I wound up kind of moving over. I've always wanted to be in the front end innovation. So I did the company path as where they wanted me to work. And when they needed, a new process piloted, a new team piloted, I kind of always volunteered for that. So like every couple of years, my role and my job changed, but really wanted front end innovation. Wound up in that for about 5 or 6 years. And then recently the company just decides to switch directions on us, and our team kind of got hacked to pieces. And so this was the first time in my career that I was like, wait a second, I'm out of a position here. I've been here 20 years and all of a sudden this team is kind of shredded, and Olivia's had to experience that firsthand, unfortunately. But the amazing part for me was this network that I've built internally and externally over the years. Within 24 hours internally, I had 3 or 4 opportunities already at my hand to say, where do you want to, we want to keep you within the organization. Where do you want to go? And so I chose this really cool group. It's out of our CareCom organization. So if you think about the first part of my career was all about signals going in, right? You're collecting data on the body. Now I'm on the back end now and saying, how do you present that to the nurses? How do you escalate that to drive care and action quicker? So this is the CareCom organization. So it's all cloud applications. So it's all new. And it's all a bunch of different companies that were through acquisition. So it's kind of like working for a startup company, because all these companies were startups. So it's just this kind of crazy group of people that have nothing in common that got thrown together to make some really interesting cloud applications. So I've been there since January, and it's really exciting and a lot of fun. So that's it.
Well, nice. So thank you all for giving us kind of a more in-depth look on your background and kind of how you came to be in your current roles and some of the things that you've been working on. So I guess to get us started, let's get into some of the questions that were submitted by our students, and we'll see how far we get in the discussion. I think this first one's kind of interesting, since you all work in very different roles. Could you tell us a little bit about what a typical day looks like in your current job that you're in? So what are kind of some of your things that you do? What are your most favorite and least favorite parts of what you do on a day-to-day basis?
Okay, I'll start here. My role is probably a bit different from Craig and Angela's, since I'm probably more focused on the business side of chemical engineering. But my day typically is really about executing projects. So I typically have about 3 to 5 clients at a time. I have 4 at the moment. They're one of 2 types of projects. They're typically either a strategic assessment or update that a particular company wants to be done on a market, a product, a competitor, a technology, or a merger and acquisition. So they're pretty strategic, and they're short term, somewhere between 1 to 2 months. And then I have to deliver back a webinar, obviously, because of the pandemic. So I'm typically, my output is really a webinar back to the executive team of, hey, this is what these are the results. We have some dialogue, and so it's either that type of project that I'm working on, and they're very specific to that particular company. The other type of project is really what I would call a process or technology transformation, and that's probably akin to maybe what some of Craig just recently talked about. And it's typically digital transformation of a process within a customer. And for example, the most recent project we just finished was a medical device company that really wanted to, they have been growing through acquisition over the last 10 years, and they wanted to standardize their customer service on a single platform. And obviously use some of the latest technology, a lot of it digitally enabled. So we were involved with actually scoping and designing that capability, and obviously getting all the feedback from all the customer service and related teams around the company. So that was a pretty interesting project as well. So it was one of those two types. So my day is pretty much focused on project execution of those types of projects. I'd say not on a daily basis, but on a weekly basis. I'll have some activities around business development, as you would suspect, in terms of drafting proposals, scope of work, pricing for existing and future work. And then really the balance is really around knowledge or skill development. And even after 30 plus years after SU, you are constantly learning and building your capabilities. And so that's something that I do on probably more on a monthly basis. And I think probably more on the technology side is real. I'm really focused on building some capabilities. But so my day is probably a little bit different. So I'm interested to see what Craig and Angela have to say.
Sure. So I'll go after you, Art. So myself and Craig probably still have very different defined roles on a day-to-day. So myself, supporting a manufacturing facility, my day this morning started at 5, where I got a call that we have a 24/7 facility. We, support manufacturing 365 days a year. So we don't really stop, nights, weekends, etc. So an issue arose overnight, and we mobilized at like 7 a.m., got on a Teams call, and we're trying to figure out what is that strategy to ensure, number one, patient safety and efficacy of the medicines. Can we continue forward processing in light of an issue that we identified overnight with manufacturing? So it's really interesting. It changes on a day-to-day basis. Kind of going to what Art said, something that I didn't really think about as I was going through, college and grad school was the business side of things. How do you make those strategic decisions? And a lot of times as engineers and as scientists, we're so heavy on the data that we're in this realm where we're paralyzed, data paralysis, where we want all this data before we can make an informed decision. But with the business working so quickly, we need to be able to balance that risk and be a little bit more risk taking. And sometimes it's really hard for myself as an engineer. I'm thinking through all these scenarios, but trying to do a risk assessment in my head. So those are one of those things that, thinking back, that might have helped me out had I been trained in that a little bit earlier. And how do we kind of integrate that as part of our learnings? And then that written part, we're also conveying responses of why are we justifying moving forward with a particular batch. So again, that technical writing piece. So embedding that in what we do as well, and how do we communicate to our senior leaders the decisions that we're making here at our facility, because it also impacts things across the network as well. So, we did get on calls with folks around the world to make sure that we're all aligned on the strategy and stuff like that. And then also conveying things with some of the quality control labs as we're checking for efficacy. So there is like a lot of communication going on. There's a lot of troubleshooting. And I think that's what honestly makes my job fun. And then, empowering the individuals and the teams that I'm leading and these cross-functional teams to continue developing them as well. And I think as we're going into a lot of this D&I realm as well, that's another aspect where a lot of these companies and corporations are looking into. How do you develop your employees? How do you have diverse slates, diverse employees? And then we're also looking one piece further, at least for our industry, is how do we ensure that we have diverse patients that we're supporting across the world? We know that each cohort of folks have different needs. Myself being Asian American, how I am going to react to some of these medications might be slightly different from my Caucasian or African American colleagues or cohorts as well. So that's the other piece on my day-to-day that I'm also, fairly embedded in, is developing those D&I strategies and how do I continue developing my folks as well.
I guess I'll go last. So my day-to-day has been interesting in this new role. So I manage a development team. So it's cross-functional. We've got software developers, quality engineering, testers, regulatory, just everything that you would think that you would need in order to kind of bring a product into market. So I have responsibility to kind of make sure this whole thing happens. And it's a brand new product. It's a brand new team. So right now we're finishing like creating the team, onboarding the team, and finishing up our planning of how we're going to go out and execute. So I've been learning quite a bit. This is a software application. So if you've ever heard of agile product development, scrums and sprints and all these great things, all the terminology I'm learning right now on the fly. I will literally listen to a podcast in the morning on a meeting that I need to run in the afternoon, but it works out well. So, but the main point of that philosophy is that you're breaking things down into really small chunks of work, and then actually doing integration of that. If you have, especially if you have multiple groups working on different components, and getting everybody aligned and demonstrating what you're actually working on, so that you can continue making progress, but making sure like you're always on target of what you're supposed to be making, right? So nobody's going off kind of in a different direction, and then 6 months later you sit down with the marketing person like, what the hell did you just build here? This is not what I was expecting at all, right? So that's the things we're trying to avoid. So so my daily life right now are lots of what they call stand-ups. So I have a stand-up with the development team. We talk about what they did yesterday, what they're going to do today if they have any issues. Then I meet with like more of a cross-functional team, what's going on, any issues. And my job is really kind of communicating out at a high level what the goals are for either the week and then the product, and removing any blockers, right? So if people are having issues, I need to kind of help and figure out how to resolve those issues, who to escalate, who to get in the next call, and just make sure everybody's communicating and crystal clear on what's going on, so that we're efficient. And when we talk about speed, I've never been involved in anything as quick as I've seen this going. The cool part about this, the role I'm in now, is it's not an FDA regulated space. It's they're medical products for medical space, but they're not actually classified, so they don't need a 510K or anything. So it's just, I feel like the shackles have been ripped off for me, because the FDA kind of puts you in those cuffs. It almost seems like everything you have to do is signed perfectly before you move to the next step and the next step and the next step. And this is like allows you to really go and do a lot of things in parallel. So it's been just really exciting. Every day is just watching the team develop, and just, again, I think what Angela said is it's going to be different every day. We're moving towards a product. So one day is all planning, the next day might be all execution, the next day is going to be doing talking about tests and how we're going to do automated tests and figure out what the reliability and performance of this product is going to be. So it's amazing to watch progression, though, and that's part of what's fun about being in product development.
Thanks, all. It's interesting how varied your day-to-day life is, and I think people kind of have a picture of what industry is, and it's very different depending on where you go in your career. I'm going to kind of combine the next two questions into one. So what steps did you take while you were at SU to prepare yourself for industry? And then do you have any suggested strategies for our students on things they can be doing now while they're students, such as skills they can develop outside the classroom to help them improve their marketability for applying for jobs?
Okay. I guess I'll go first again, keep the order going. With regards to steps while I was at SU, you're asking me to go back in my memory banks here. So I'd say probably the two things, though, I mean, seriously, was I was fortunate to, I think, clearly summer internships first, right? I think I was fortunate to, apply for a scholarship freshman year, and part of that scholarship required, obviously, GPA performance, but also summer internship, and the company was Corning, not too far from Syracuse, Corning Glass. So I was fortunate enough to get a summer internship after freshman, sophomore, and junior year. So I had a pretty decent idea of what a process engineer, a chemical engineering process engineer did in a factory. So, I mean, I think for sure that was something that prepared me for industry. I'd say the other thing is really just leveraging organizations. And, you know, I think at the time, you know, I leveraged the fraternity that I was a part of. I leveraged the National Society of Black Engineers. They all provided, you know, networking opportunities, job fairs, et cetera, to, you know, explore some opportunities beyond just a career center, right? So, I mean, I think those were, you know, two things while I was at SU. And I think just regards to experiences, I think what I learned, I mean, I think we all talked about it on, you know, on our comments here, but, you know, problem solving, I think teamwork, I think one thing that I learned specifically was really, you know, working hard is good, but working smart is better. And sometimes in college you kind of feel like, hey, I gotta, you know, work through the night, and obviously we all did that, and you have to do that. But there is an aspect of efficiency that you learn, I think, as you know, kind of go through your career. And there is an aspect of, yeah, I mean, you want to do things right, but you also want to be able to do things efficiently as well. And so, you know, I think for me, I think those were the, you know, some of the learnings from SU. And I think in terms of, not to steal everybody's thunder, but I think the big one with regards to recommendations is clearly networking, right? And and I think that's not something you pick up really in college. I mean, for me, I kind of picked that up later in my career. And so I think the more you can do that, beyond your SU college mates, and look at your friends, look at your parents' friends, look at whatever organizations that you are a part of, and just continue to leverage LinkedIn and the other networks to connect with people. And it's amazing, you know, the stories that you hear that somebody's friend work for this company that you are trying to contact. And if you reach out to them on LinkedIn or through that friend, you'll be amazed what that person would do, and they don't even know you, right? And they open the door for you to get access to a particular company, right? So, so at that point, maybe I'll stop and I'll let Craig and Angela chime in.
Craig, you can go next. I'll break up the
Sure.
flow.
All right. Yeah, I mean, absolutely, Art. The networking piece. Even so, in my previous role, we were always trying to kind of meet with experts as well. Just so we weren't trying to find jobs, we were trying to find people to work with. Conferences was the way we did that, right? So we would reach out to people. You don't hear anything, but you to go to a conference, you see someone talk, you go up and talk with them. It's amazing how much that makes a difference. So conferences is absolutely huge. And I spoke about the other piece for me early in my career. I started in undergrad in a lab doing a work study job. I was literally like doing the data entry and graphing for all of the research that I knew nothing about. And being in that lab, I learned a ton about what was happening. At the time, we had senior projects that were individual based. So I wound up doing my senior project for a need that he had in his lab. And then that project was really, it was actually really exciting, and I learned a ton on it. But when they were looking for the internship at Welch Allyn, the Welch Allyn engineers came down and looked at my project that I had worked on in my senior design and talked with me on that. That helped me get into the Welch Allyn, right? So a work study job pretty much got me my internship and my career at Welch Allyn, which I just didn't want to work in the cafeteria anymore, which is why I changed it. But hindsight, I was like, that was really important. And I try to talk, when I talk to students, I'm like, it doesn't matter like what you're doing to start off. Something simple just to get in a space where you want to be can make a really big difference. Kind of just seeing what other people do and say, oh, wow, I wanted to do that role. I see that person, I know that person doing that role, and I'm going to go talk to them and find out that's really cool, or that is nothing like I thought it was. So I better really rethink it. And then the other piece, when I've talked to students in the past, I'm like, go out and look at job recs. So like if there's a job you think you're interested in, go out. It doesn't matter if you're not qualified now, go out and look, see what they want for experience for 2 and 5 years out, and look at what they're asking for, and like figure out how to get your resume to match that. So if they're looking for somebody with a PhD in that role, you better be thinking about PhDs. If you're thinking about, so like I wanted to do software or project management stuff, all right, they're looking for agile development or lean, lean process certification. So you can start figuring out how to build your resume around the things that they're asking for to get you to that area. And the same with labs. If there's something that's really interesting, go find out who's doing the research in that lab through publications, and then go to a conference that they're at and meet that person and try to make rapport there and see if they're doing anything in the lab. I mean, it's just, it all comes down to like kind of, just doing the research and really understanding, even if you don't know exactly where you want to go, you got to do that level to get at least more information to make decisions, because you're not going to figure it out just sitting in my basement, right? I'm not going to figure out what I want to do sitting in my basement here. So anyway, I'll let Angela finish this up.
Thanks, Craig. So I think both Art and Craig noted very much about the networking piece, and it's just being that the vulnerability of how do you step outside of your comfort zone. And it can be really challenging, especially as right now we're in this virtual world, but it also gives us an advantage that you're capable of just pinging someone on LinkedIn and say, hey, I saw your post here. Can you, do you have some time to just discuss your interests, or this is a really cool job that you're doing. And most likely than not, someone will respond. It might take them a couple of days. It's not because they don't care, but they just need to find the time to get back to you. So definitely do that. And then think about different roles as well. Kind of as Craig said, you don't know what you really want to do until you start exploring those avenues. Even for myself, I never had considered working in big pharma. I always thought of it as a big bad wolf. It has a bad stigma from back in the day. Now that I'm in it, I see the other side of things and how purposeful it is. We're working for the patients, and that's the mission of everything that I do every day, is to support the patients out there, which was my original mission when I went into bioengineering in the first place. So do something that's passionate for yourself. And thinking about different opportunities as y'all are going through school, going into the lab, finding areas that you're like, oh, I don't know if I really want to do this, but at least you'll know before delving into a career full time that you're like, oh, I really hate this. So, for myself, I did start in a lab immediately after my freshman year. And since then, I've loved it. And being in a different space now, kind of on the outside of it, but still being able to help drive the study designs and the hypothesis testing and stuff is still really neat, but still being able to kind of do different things throughout your career as you're growing. But going back to when I was in school, I think pivotal, besides the research, was also the mentorship. How do you identify and find someone that you really trust, that you can kind of bounce ideas off of, that you've seen their career trajectory, and professors, they're there to support you. They have a world of knowledge in a lot of different areas, and leverage the other grad students in the program, and even students outside of your direct program in a different major or whatnot. And you'll be surprised to see how everyone kind of faces the same ideas, the same fears and things like that, and just kind of have those conversations. And then the other piece is also sponsorship, which is a little bit different from mentorship. How do you build the advocacy as you go through your career? And thankfully for myself, Dr. Hasenwinkel was one of my mentors I still go to, as well as a sponsor, as well as Dr. Frondoza. So it's really great to still be able to go back to folks who have shaped me to who I am today, and then also continue building on that as I continue going through my career at Bristol Myers as well. So both internal, external, and then just building that network of individuals that you really trust.
I just wanted to add one, sorry.
Oh, please.
Just one other thing.
No, go ahead. Yeah.
I know, Angela, you were talking, we were talking earlier. So both of us have done this program in Syracuse called Leadership Greater Syracuse, Community Leadership Program. And it was actually funny because we were like, hey, we have a common friend, and Angela knows her through Leadership Greater Syracuse. there's a community leadership program. It's an amazing way to do networking. You don't have to do that specific one, but thinking about, other ways of meeting like-minded people or people who are just in different industries, you never know where the network's going to take you. That was a really cool program. You met a ton of people in all the different industries going on in the area. I also help run the Syracuse Ultimate Frisbee Leagues here. It's a bunch of athletic nerds is what we call it. Half the kids in there who I've known throughout the years are all PhD, many doctors, and it's amazing just to see my network alone from just the sport. I mean, tons and tons of amazing things that are happening with these people. So you'd be surprised at where you can get a network that could, be something that would land you either a job or something that's other, just really cool opportunities.
Yeah, and I definitely concur. There's so many things going on in the community, and just get involved and find something again that you're passionate about. And you just don't know who that next person that you're going to contact that you could support or vice versa. So it's really cool. It's such a small community when you really think about it, and everyone's kind of interconnected.
Well, thank you all for those comments. The time is really flying by from this seminar. So I wanted to get into, we did have a couple of questions pop up in the chat, and I wanted to make sure we at least got a chance to go through one of those. So one of our students, Fran, has, I think, a good question, specifically, for people working in industry. How much autonomy do you have in the direction of a given project that you're working on? So for example, do you typically pitch an idea for a certain product or direction, or do most of those ideas tend to come from the top down, and then you have to kind of, sort of adapt and work with what you're given? How much, kind of say do you have in the process? Maybe any of our panelists could chime in on that.
Yeah, I can kick it off. So in the process development space, you definitely have basically everything is open to you. So they're like, okay, well, we need this with X amount, figure it out. However, as we transition more into the commercial space, you're very more restrained in what you can do. So instead of thinking outside the box that you would do in development, you're thinking inside the box for innovative solutions. So it's just as much fun because you can basically do anything you want, but within some constraints. And I think that's where you continue building on your passion, what you're really interested in. You do have flexibility, but also keeping in mind it's the bottom line of the business. They're here at the end of the day to still make a profit in some respects. So for my current role right now, it's how do I help support and push out more medicines, but still ensure safety and efficacy for the patients. So if I'm able to fulfill those two missions, then basically we can vet a lot of these things through our executive leadership to determine whether or not it's something we want to pursue or not. And then also weighing that cost benefit analysis of what is at risk, what is that benefit, and what's that long term, how many resources do we need? How much does it impact our finances? Things like that.
Yeah, this one's interesting. So like I said, I've been in these two very different groups. It really depends on if there's a marketing pull. So marketing teams own a product roadmap. If they have something on their roadmap that they need people to work on, depending on how flushed out that is, they're going to grab a team and ask you to work on it. So like the project I'm on now is kind of ground up. They weren't sure. So it also depends on where in the cycle. We were very early stage. So that was part of the reason why I wanted to join in, because I get to do the whole product life cycle, right? So we're trying to figure out what the product's going to be, working with marketing on the needs that we want to meet, and then also how we're going to meet those needs. So really exciting there. Again, we have some flexibility in how we do that. Even though it's not a regulated product, it's still within the medical device space. So you still have to follow those kind of good development practices. In the previous role, we were on this innovation team, and so we could come up with anything we wanted. The problem and figure out how we wanted to approach it. The problem was then pitching it to the business. So in the end, you still need to find a home for it, right? So we're given this autonomy, but many of those projects wind up on a shelf because you have to have like all of the stars aligning right. you have to have the business at the right time, the technology at the right time, and the clinical thing and the clinical need all aligning perfectly for something to go. So, you know, in my past group, we had a project we called Kenny. If any of you ever watch South Park, every episode they kill Kenny. Well, every year this project got killed. We'd call it, oh, Kenny got killed again, because it wasn't right time. And eventually, like after years, we found the right alignment of the technology and the business for it to go. And it wound up in a different form than we had worked on. But it really, it makes a difference. And you'd be shocked at what can kill a product. You know, it could be the greatest thing you think in the world from a technology, and it needs all like the stars to align. So it's just the nature of being in product development.
Yeah, I just think this, I think Craig and Angela, I mean, I think they answered it perfectly well. I think from my perspective, the only thing I would add, just based on where I'm at in my career, I have a lot of autonomy, but I think when I reflect on my corporate career, there are definitely guardrails that are in place, and depending on which part of the organization that you're in, you know, there's only so much you can do. But I think in commercial, yes, I think there's some guidelines there, right? Because of you know, profit expectations, cost expectations, customer impact expectations, things of that nature. But you know, I think Craig's point, I think you know, if you're in a part of the organization where there is innovation that is a critical element of success, there is definitely an opportunity to get a bit more autonomy. There's no doubt about that. So I think it depends on you know which part of the organization that you're in, and then also you know where you are in your career.
All right, I think we are out of time, and we did not get to near as many questions as I thought we would. We've had lots of good, thoughtful answers to the few questions that we've gotten to. So I think overall this has been really an interesting discussion. Hopefully the students are finding it valuable. And just speaking to building up the network, I'll take those recommendations. Now Craig, Angela, and Art are part of your network as SU students who attended this panel. So I hope I'm not overstepping and saying that you could reach out to them if you have more questions.
Absolutely.
And one piece of advice that I've been given that I have found I'm responsive to as a faculty member is if you reach out to somebody on LinkedIn, give them a like personalized message about why, not just I want to add you to my LinkedIn network. Say, I saw you at this panel at SU. I'd love to connect a little bit more, so they know where you're coming from and why you're reaching out to them. Yeah, let's do some virtual applause for our panelists.
Yeah, thank you all for
Thanks for all the questions that were submitted too.
Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah,
Thanks,
thank you.
everyone. Good to see you all.